Hello and welcome back to the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. And we are excited to announce, and I know I sound a little hesitant because Amy and I we kind of brainstormed the fact that we want to change up the formatting a little bit for our shows. We want to start releasing them all on the same day, so all on Friday. But we're not going to necessarily focus so much on length, but on content. So one of the things that she and I talk about a lot is that, the minisodes, we have to really keep it short, even though we don't always stay true to that format. For the longer ones, we have to keep it long. And we're like freewheeling everything now. But I mean, instead of staying in this pocket of this has to be 5 minutes, this has to be 30 minutes, which we never adhere to, we're going to put together shows that actually fit. So, making the format fit the show as opposed to the show fitting the format. Because sometimes there are things that obviously, if you've been a longtime listener, that we can kind of rant on for a long time. Because we have strong opinions, as Amy said, strong opinions about many things.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd love to get your feedback. And also I'd love to know, do you like the long form shows? Would you rather see more long ones versus short? So in your feed, wherever you listen to podcasts, you're going to start to see episodes populating all on the same day. And we're getting away from the mini. So we're dropping the mini-sode term. But check the episode length to see what you really have the time for. So I think that hopefully we'll be able to bring even more quality shows to our listeners, not necessarily tethered to how long that the show actually has to be.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about that. How about you, Amy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to make I think it makes a lot more sense. And I think everybody will appreciate that we're just doing our thing instead of, like you said, worrying about a format.
Right, exactly. And this also allows us to drop a series of shorter episodes if that's really all that, if what we're covering doesn't necessarily need that much time. But today's topic, I'm a little on the fence in terms of how long we're going to talk about this, because this is a topic for the ages, as they say. Pricing your books for ROI, pricing your books for your return on investment. That's kind of a hot topic. I have very strong opinions about this. I cannot tell you how many times over the years that I have talked to authors who say that I have I have a book, and yes, I have it priced high, but I want to earn back what I invested in the book. And what they've essentially done in many cases, not every case, but in many cases, they've priced themselves literally out of the market and unfortunately set themselves up for failure.
Yeah, I see that a lot. That is actually one of the first things. If an author comes to us and the book is already out, that is one of the first things that I actually look at as well. I check the pricing, and I have that conversation with them before we start, Penny. And, I know you guys, maybe I sound like a broken record, but we really are very honest when authors come to us and we chat about potentially working together. And so I am very straightforward. If somebody's book is priced really high for their genre or their topic, or especially, and this is something else that we can touch on, based on what their platform has achieved to date, we let them know that you can invest a lot in marketing and promotion, but at the end of the day, before somebody clicks buy, they do have their limits, and they have expectations of what books should cost based on what they're used to. And I think that's something that people forget about. It's easy to get caught up in production costs and things like that. And there's so many different choices that you can make along the way, right, Penny, that can affect the cost of your book.
Yeah.
And how much it's going to end up, costing you personally for each copy. But yeah, I let authors know when they come to us, like, hey, that doesn't mean that we can't work together, but we do want you to understand that your book is priced higher than most of the competition out there. And so you may get a lot of traffic to your retail page, but that price point may actually prevent people from clicking buy.
Well, and Amy, you mentioned you say this a lot, which is very smart. You are asking for your readers' time, right? So, especially if you're a first-time author, and not only asking for their time, but you're also asking them to fork over more money than they normally would for a book, right? Mm-hmm. So, think about that, because it's a little bit, so to price your books so that you'll earn back your investment is very counterintuitive to what actually works. Because when you price your books out of the market, you're not going to sell as many. I mean, your mom might buy one, and maybe your best friend or your husband or spouse. You know what I mean? You're not, but for the rest, you're probably not going to sell any books. Now, and I understand that sometimes a publisher prices a book and you don't necessarily have a say in it. And university presses, we love working with university presses, but they tend to price their books higher. In some cases, it's warranted because there are books, they're textbooks, or they're specific markets that do have that flexibility where the books can be priced higher. But in most cases, your books have to be priced competitively. And one of the things that I would suggest is look at what's in your market. Now, I want to get away from the conversation around your books have to be priced at 99 cents, or they have to be free, or they have to be dirt cheap. There was a time and a place for that. And that time and place is gone. I'm not a fan of releasing a book that's 99 cents. I think you put a lot of work into it. What I do think makes sense is if you have lots and lots of books out, and as your books age, your price should reflect that aging process, right? So your older books are probably not going to be at the same price as your newer books. Your newer books are going to cost more than your older books typically. If an author, and I'm not necessarily saying like last year's books, you should drop the price on that. I'm talking about if you have books out from, like I have 22 books out, but I have one that has been out for a bunch of years and it's like 99 cents or something. Right. But Amy, tell me a little bit more talk a little bit more about what you see in terms of like pricing mistakes that authors make.
Yeah. And I would say, and I mentioned this briefly previously, but I think something else that we see, Penny, is your pricing to some degree also changes with what you're bringing to the table and what you've achieved with your platform to date as well. You might have a really great concept and you might have a really great book and you had a great editor and a great cover and all these things, but you really, if you're relatively new on the scene, does that date me? Do people even say that anymore? Sorry. But truly, if you're relatively new on the scene and you don't have an established online presence yet, you don't own a lot of online real estate, meaning if people search your name, are they going to see your book? Are they going to see articles you've written? Are they going to see social popping up that you're active on? Things like that. Once you establish a little clout, you can also charge a little bit more for your books too. But at the beginning, it's really better. You're going to do yourself a lot more favors by getting more books in hands and not having people get hung up on a price point is really your best bet. Get books in hands. That's why, not to get off on a different subject, but why we're such fans of BOGOs too, promotions, buy one, get one, or buy one, give one, because in some authors are like, you want me to give away books? It's like right now your focus should be getting books in hands and building fans.
Yeah,
because they will come back and they will buy your next book, so there's a lot of different layers of strategy to the pricing conversation. And that's, it's one of those things that when you first start off, you don't know what you don't know, but that's shameless plug. That's why we do this podcast.
Right. Exactly. And I think that pricing, everything is part of your sales package. And that includes the pricing of your book. Now, in some cases, when you have a and I get this question a lot from authors, actually. They ask me, how much should I price my book? And it's very difficult to pull a number out of the sky. Part of the reason for that is because it depends on there's a lot of variables that goes into book pricing, right? The first is obviously the market. So price your books to your market. That's the first piece of this. But the second is if you have, like, let's say, for example, a book that has illustrations, or you have a coffee table book, or you have something, those books then become much more expensive to produce, which elevates the price on them. So sometimes there's a natural elevation to a price because of the nature of the content of the book, right? So so that's part of it too, is that you have to look at all of the factors. There is some flexibility with your ebook, typically. So when you have a publisher who maybe they're pricing the book and I will say that not every publisher, I mean, this is not be publisher bashing, but not every publisher knows how to price a book effectively, right? The big publishers do, some of the more well-known ones do, but Amy and I see a lot of small little hybrid one-off publishers cropping up, and they have no clue about book pricing. And they are singing from that songbook of, we got to price this book high because we need to make back the investment in this author if they haven't charged the author for publication. In those cases, you can still potentially save the book with the ebook, but then if the book is, if it's a textbook, for example, which obviously textbooks tend to be more expensive, you're probably not going to sell a lot of copies of the ebook either. So it's important. Pricing, strategic pricing is just, I mean, I cannot emphasize that enough. And, you might play with pricing too, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to price everything at with the 0.99 cents of $7.99 or $5.99 or $9.99. You could have fun. You could do something like $9.51. Try some, you know what I mean? I mean, when you look at Amazon, I mean, you see that it kind of, I don't know, it gets your attention.
It absolutely does. And I think you touched on something really smart with especially the smaller publishers or the boutique publishers, Penny. A lot of times, I will have initial conversations with authors, and it's actually, they didn't realize they have a say. They just kind of assume, like you said, they assume the publisher knows what they're doing, and that is set in stone. But I think there are plenty of publishers out there that are actually willing to have that conversation. But if the author doesn't speak up or doesn't ask questions, they're going to go with, like you said, whatever will help them make their investment back quicker. But It doesn't mean that conversation is entirely off the table. So if you have, used a service to help get your book out there, have that conversation with them. See what your options are, because you don't know if you don't ask. And this is something else, Penny, that comes up a lot. And unfortunately, for a lot of authors, it's a little too late. So I'm going to kind of put you on the spot here. Sorry. But can you think of a couple common, I don't want to say mistakes, because if some people, it works for them, they had the budget, they planned for it. But what are some elements of production that you think end up catching authors off guard in terms of their cost at the end of when they start crunching numbers for how they have to price their books? Like, what elements of the production sometimes can get wildly out of control?
Well, no, that's a great question. So the type of paper that you use, right? We talk a lot about print on demand, but that is not the only way to print a book. So if you're doing, if you're offset printing, things like the type of paper that you're using, the thickness of the paper, French flaps on paperback books. I adore French flaps, but they add so much to the cost of the book, right? Hardcover, that's kind of a given, right? Hardcover adds more to the cost of the book, but paper, and the paper that you get when you print via print on demand is completely fine. But sometimes people want it when they have images in the book or something, they want a thicker, heavier paper. I see this a lot of times, for example, in children's books. The other thing that will that will change how you can price your book is the size of the book. So, and I know we don't want to get off too far down this rabbit hole because we could do a whole show on book sizes, but and we're actually getting ready to do a show on Follow the Rules, which sounds like a total buzzkill, but it's going to be a great show, I promise. And I don't know if it's going to run before or after this particular episode, so definitely look for it. But there are rules about the size of the print size of the book, right? 6x9, whatever, for a reason. Because when you do odd size books, which I understand a lot of children's books fall into that bucket, right? But when you do really oddly sized books, it's challenging. I wanted to say nightmare. It can be challenging.
We kind of snuck it in there anyway.
And I'm not necessarily saying, hey, if you're listening to the show thinking, oh, I want to do this different size book. Sometimes people just want to do an odd size book to stand out. The problem with that is that it's difficult to get it shelved at Barnes & Noble or any store, right? Any in-person store. We're so used to talking about Amazon. Any in-person store, it's very difficult to get it shelved. And they tend to be more expensive. They're way more expensive to print, right? So those are some of the things. And I apologize for going so far down that rabbit hole, but those are some of the things that can really surprisingly elevate the cost of the book. If you're thinking about, I don't want to do print on demand, I don't really like the books, whatever my book, the colors, whatever reason, get some quotes from some offset printing companies in the US and see what they come back with and get an idea. And then I recommend typically following the guidelines for pricing is doubling the print fee. That's not an exact math, but that's generally so if the book prints at, and I had an author one time, this is way before your time, Amy, threw their book up on Amazon and it actually ended up losing 25 cents a book.
Oh, God.
Because they didn't do the math right? So you have the cost of the print. So let's say it's $3 or $1.50 to print the book. If it's up on Amazon, Amazon's going to take a cut of that. If it's in Barnes & Noble, Barnes & Noble's going to take a cut of that. You have shipping, you have all of these other things to consider with your book pricing. So just make sure to do the math right. I know it's easy to, and this is again why a lot of authors default to publishing companies or hybrid companies or whatever, because it's like, oh, math is hard. And I get it. Math is hard, but it does matter to the success of your book and to, obviously selling more books and your career depends on the price of the book too.
Right. I love that. So I think we I think we touched on some really good points. And I think, as we always say, this is hopefully for all of you listening, this is a long-term, path that you're on. You have a long, successful road ahead of you, and it's worth the headaches, the math headaches, looking at all your options. It's worth figuring it out and thinking about what your long-term goals are. And that includes, how you price your books. It all comes together and do the hard things first, right, Penny?
Yeah. Do the hard things first.
Yes, tackling this stuff first will save you headaches in the long run, and it'll save some unnecessary kind of chaotic pivoting that you might have to do down the road.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Again, we welcome feedback. We love reviews wherever you listen to podcasts, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.